Well, good morning again. It's that afternoon now, isn't it? Afternoon, 10 past 12. Church is good. So it's great to be with you. It really is great to be here. And I live with little people normally. By that, I mean my children, not munchkins, right? Just to clarify. But I've got a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. It's amazing, actually. We were told we'd never have children, and we've got a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. So, Saviour, he can move mountains. He can also impregnate women from sterile men when he chooses to. It's wonderful. Anyway, that's a complete red herring. But when you live with little people, you sometimes live with misunderstandings. And sometimes things are seen wrong. And there was one recently. A woman knocked on our door at 10 past 6 on a Friday evening. It was brilliant. She was what I like to call a chugger, which is the charity mugger, wanting your £3 a month. I open the door. She looks at me and she says, "Is your mum home?" I was so happy. I'm 37. I've not lived with my mum for 20 years. I was so happy. I nearly called my wife over and called her mum, but I thought, not a good idea, so we left it there. Or I was then having a bit of lunch with my son not that long ago. I said to him, "Danny, what do you want to be when you grow up?" He says, "I want to work for the Evangelical Alliance, Daddy, so I can be with you every day." He says, "But when I'm there, I want to be a Ninja Turtle." Nah, no, not quite sure we're looking for one of those. Anne was away speaking. Anne's my wife. She was away speaking yesterday, so I took the kids out for the day. And my son's at the current stage where every time we walk past a drain, we have to stop to say hello to the Ninja Turtles. But anyway, complete misunderstandings all over the place. You know, the church lives with misunderstandings. We listen to the world when they tell us we're done. We start thinking that the gospel sharing is for other people. We start thinking that maybe the church did have a better past than it has a present. We start being intimidated by our culture. It's never been this hard. We start saying things like that. Utter nonsense. Paul writes to Rome, says, "I am bound, I'm eager, I'm not ashamed." At a time when Rome was a city, people used to go and stare at in awe and wonder. They'd go on a pilgrimage to see the ultimate human power and pride would be to stare at Rome. Paul writes to it and says, "I am bound, I'm eager, I'm not ashamed." 2,000 years later, the Colosseum's in ruins and Jesus is alive. Paul was right. It might be that in our day we have to stand out, speak out, and act out and be different, but that's okay, because in 2,000 years' time, if the world's still here, Jesus will still be alive, and this secular, pluralistic nonsense will all be gone. But the landscape's hard, isn't it? There's some ways of seeing it as hard. The Department for Education said recently, if a 9-year-old girl in a primary school class uses the Bible to justify any moral position, then she'll be put on a list made available to social services of potential radical extremists. Now, what's that all about? Problem is, I've got one of those children. When she gets kicked out of school for being too Jesus, she can have whatever present she wants. But we're living in a difficult landscape. There's hostility to Christianity. There's a chill factor. There's some laws being brought in to protect protect us against Islamic State. But if they come in, they will stop our freedoms of speech. You know, I'm convinced in my lifetime I'll get into trouble. Because as long as there's air in my lungs, I will not stop saying that Jesus is not an option. He's not a hobby. He's the way, the truth, and the life. And on that, there is no compromise. The exclusivity of Christ will get us into trouble. But it's the truth. I spoke at the Sun newspaper. They've got a Christian union. And I spoke at their evangelistic event. I walked along towards the room it was in. I closed my eyes so I didn't see any images that might cause me to stumble. And I ended up at the event. And at the event, I had fun. It was great. But I met a Christian lawyer at the end who works on the Sun. I said, "How would your newspaper view me?" He said, "Narrow-minded, extremist, bigot." I said, "Thank you." I said, "How do you view me?" He said, "Child of the living God, living out your God-given calling." There's a perception on what we are, and there's a reality on what we are. Don't listen to the perception. I could spend the rest of my life fighting against what people think of me. But you know, the only way to convince people that what you're doing is not bigoted but is true is for them to come to faith. The only thing I know that turns around someone's view on Christians is when they meet Jesus. Because then they're the first to want to tell their friends too. So I want to spend my energies reaching people, not worrying what those who don't agree with me think about me. You know, we live in this world as well where in January it was announced the Oxford Dictionary word of the year is post-truth. I preferred the year before, it was selfie, but it's post-truth. Now, there's various issues with that. First issue, that's 2 words. The second issue, what does post-truth mean? If you look at the definition for post-truth, it means the idea that your personal feelings are more important than absolute facts. What utter garbage! Who wants to live in a country where how you feel that day is more important than any absolute fact? I was training some young evangelists recently, and I stood in front of them and I said, all right, we're going to play the post-truth game. The world is flat. Out-argue me. Do you know, they wouldn't. We know the world's not flat, but they wouldn't out-argue me. They would only take me on when I said, okay, we'll try another one. I'm a 5'2" Chinese woman. Then they would argue with me. But you know, lots of people wouldn't. Because if that's how I feel, that's fine. Garbage. There's absolute truth, and this is it. Jesus conquered the grave that you might have life in all its fullness. No compromise, no feeling trumping that. You know what? Base things on your feelings, you get yourself into trouble. Base things on Jesus, you've got constant hope. But what we've got to do as a church is realize the landscape might be hard, but the future's brilliant. Because we've got to be people of hope. You can't be people who believe that death is defeated and life in all its fullness is possible today and be hopeless. You've got to be hopeful. But Christians are really bad at being negative. I realized this recently. I'm a consulting editor on a Christian magazine who did this article saying that by 2050, the church in Britain will be considered in the past tense. Now, I emailed in and just said, do you want me to stop being a consulting editor? And they're like, why? I said, well, basically, leave it to Dawkins. Why do we do research on ourselves that tells the world how badly we're doing and then print it in our own publications? It just makes no sense. We're the only people group in the United Kingdom who spend our own energy, time, and resources telling the world how badly we're doing. No one wants to join that. What we need to do is start being positive. I got asked to endorse a book. It was called The Church is One Generation Away from Extinction. Obviously, I said no. For a start, anything that has an oral tradition is one generation away from extinction. That's just common sense. But secondly, why would you produce a book called that? So I said no politely whilst considering places they could put the manuscript. Anyway, different issue. But I don't want to be negative, do you? I want to be a person of hope. Because at the same time as being a Christian, I'm also a huge football fan. Huge football fan. I support the same team Jesus supports, and everyone knows that's AFC Wimbledon. So why does Jesus support Wimbledon? It's so easy. He loves those who are marginalized, who are outcast, who live in exile, who've been mistreated, who've had their home nation stolen from them. Anyway, different issue. But football fans every summer believe the next year is going to be their year. And it's based on nothing. You said you're an Arsenal fan, didn't you, Rod? No? Okay. Arsenal fans, even Arsenal fans this summer are going to believe next year is going to be okay. Based on nothing. I'm an England fan, right? And I secretly believe we're going to win the World Cup next year. It's nonsense, right? But you've got these optimistic football fans and these pessimistic Christians. I would rather be in this club than this club. Why? Because this one's got hope. And as a Christian, it's not based on nothing. It's based on the empty grave. It's based on the God who threw the stars into space, then became a baby for you and me. That's where we place our hope. Because I am utterly convinced from some of what I'm seeing, some of what I'm hearing, and the God I follow, I am utterly convinced we're going to see something amazing in the United Kingdom. You know, I don't know about you, but when people sing that song, Savior, He Can Move the Mountains, you look around the room and you think, I don't think anyone here believes this. You know, everyone loves that song, but you think, no one believes this. No one believes He's going to move. You don't believe He's going to move a molehill, let alone a mountain. But it's possible. With God, it's possible. And I believe in my lifetime, we're going to see a move of God in the United Kingdom we've only dreamt or read about. I think we're going to see stuff happen we've never thought possible. Wembley Stadium round the corner. They'll delay the football because instead of singing about 22 men running after an inflated pig's bladder, people will be worshipping the King of the world. There'll be some oral messaging of the gospel going around the stadium as people come to faith. You go shopping and something of the presence of God will have invaded the place. You go to a prison and they won't be able to get people back into their cells because something of the Spirit of God has taken over in that institution. I believe we're going to see some outrageous things. You're going to go into schools and you're not going to need to say anything because something of God is just moving. I think it's going to happen in our lifetime. I really do. If it doesn't, I will die believing it was coming tomorrow. But whatever happens, I want to be a person of hope. Because we as Christians say we want to reach the world, but we come across as so hopeless. If you believe in this Jesus, define yourself by hope. And hope that's not destroyed when life is pants. Because let's be honest as well, let's not do this prosperity nonsense. Come to faith, everything's perfect, wonderful. And that's not true. Come to faith, you've got hope every day. It doesn't mean life's not hard. But pick up a positive script and we might just reach the world. So if you've got your Bibles, would you turn them on? We're going to go to Acts chapter 5. If it's any help, it's page 924 in my Bible. We're going to start reading at verse 12 of Acts 5. Just want to look at what witness looked like for some of the early church as we share this morning. The apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders among the people, and all the believers used to meet together in Solomon's colonnade. No one else dared join them, even though they were highly regarded by the people. Nevertheless, more and more men and women believed in the Lord and were added to their number. As a result, people brought the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and mats, so that at least Peter's shadow might fall on some of them as he passed by. Crowds gathered also from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing their sick and those tormented by evil spirits, and all of them were healed. Then the high priest and all his associates, who were members of the party of the Sadducees, were filled with jealousy. They arrested the apostles and put them in the public jail. But during the night, an angel of the Lord opened the doors of the jail and brought them out. Go stand in the temple courts, he said, and tell the people the full message of this new life. At daybreak, they entered the temple courts as they had been told and began to teach the people. When the high priest and his associates arrived, they called together the Sanhedrin, the full assembly of the elders of Israel, and sent to the jail for the apostles. But on arriving at the jail, the officers did not find them there. So they went back and reported, "We found the jail securely locked with the guards standing at the doors. But when we opened them, we found no one inside." On hearing this report, the captain of the temple guard and the chief priests were puzzled, wondering what would come of this. Then someone came and said, "Look, the men you put in jail are standing in the temple courts, teaching the people." You know, there's just three really quick things I wanted to share with you today as we think about reaching other people. First is this: our God is all-powerful. Yeah, this is the thing that gives me the most confidence, is how powerful God is. Nothing to do with me. People often say to me, you're brave and you're out there and you'll say stuff. No. It's an awareness of how great God is that gives you the confidence to speak out. Nothing to do with yourself. The rest of us, we're broken human beings, aren't we? I'm like anyone else. I can't eat for an hour before I speak anywhere. You know, you end up going to the loo 15 times the hour before. You're convinced afterwards it's gone terribly, you've done nothing. And frankly, God keeps you in your place. On the rare occasion it goes well, no one comes to faith. When it goes terribly, loads do. But, you know, it's an awareness of how powerful God is that gives me the confidence to share the gospel. Because our God is all-powerful. We start thinking we are, but you know what? We're not. You know, I used to be quite a good footballer. It now hurts me sometimes to play with my children in the garden. It doesn't mean I don't play often, but you get this little twinge. My wife said to me the other day, she said, "Oh, you weren't moving quite how you do after the football the other day." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, when I last watched you closely, you're about 27 and you could play properly." That's not nice. But you know what? The human body starts saying no. But God remains all-powerful. We can start thinking we're all kinds of things, but you know what? It's God who's powerful, not us. And it's the fact God's doing stuff that gets them into trouble. I love that. I don't want to get into trouble unnecessarily, but I really don't mind getting into trouble with the authorities in this country if it's because God's moving. Because God's so powerful, they can't miss it. The church's activities were so gospel-focused and were increasing to such an extent, the world couldn't miss it. When you're part of an early church, it shares everything it has, loves with all it has, and opens its mouth to share its message, the world can't miss it. Whereas I get a bit concerned sometimes that we hide our Christianity. You know, I find Christians really depressing at Christmas time. Because they say this, and every day I hear someone say, "Well, I wish the world wouldn't take Christ out of Christmas." I find it a bit depressing because I think until we stop taking Christ out of Christianity, let's not have a go at the world for taking Christ out of Christmas. People say, "What do you mean?" Well, for me, it's quite simple. I look at so much church activity in the United Kingdom, and it is simply doing what the state needs to do and doing it for cheaper. I don't think there's anything wrong with all the social stuff. It's just got to be in balance. I don't want to see some pendulum swing away from that towards words. I just want to see enough gospel alongside all the action. When I used to run Youth for Christ, every time someone would start something that, well, you didn't have to tell young people the gospel. You could just show them with your hands. We'd lose all our volunteers. Because everyone wants to do the nice thing that you get an OBE for. But the bottom line is, what we've got to do is be defined by whose we are. The world says, here you are, here's the world revolving around you. Who you are is what matters. It's not. Whose you are is what matters. We are children of the living God. We need to open our mouths and make sure that all we do is Jesus front and back. Every kid goes to a parent and toddler group. Over 90% of parent and toddler groups are run in churches. Where's the fruit? We've got to bring the Jesus piece back in. We're looking at doing some of this at EA, of catalyzing some resources to redeem parent and toddler groups. Not because they're wrong, but to say, hang on, let's sort this out. Most church-based parent and toddler groups sing songs about the wheels on the bus, not about the wise man building his house on a rock. Or tell stories about bear hunts, not about the feeding of 5,000. This stuff's not complicated. What we've got to do is believe in this powerful God and make him front and back in youth work. So much youth work wants to be massive. And in order to be massive, you mustn't mention Jesus. We mustn't put anyone off. But if you look at Jesus, he decided a youth group for him was good enough at 12 because the disciples were aged 15 to 22. And of his 12, one denied him, one doubted him, one betrayed him. Jesus had a youth group of 12 with a 75% success rate. But I'll tell you something, it was Jesus front and back, wasn't it? Our God is so powerful. Let's make sure what we're doing is Jesus front and back. And let me encourage you. It's all dependent on God. It's not dependent on you. All God calls us to be is brave. All he calls us to be is open-handed, saying, this is all I've got, Lord. Would you use it? And then his power will come upon it. Even when you do things badly, he can use it. My worst ever sermon was 10 years ago. Well, you might say it was this morning, but it was 10 years ago. I went to North Wales to speak at a youth event. North Wales is a long way from London. When I worked in youth events, a lot of the time you'd get told there's going to be hundreds of young people. I got to this youth event with the promise of hundreds. I've got more fingers than there were young people. There were 9 young people. The church had hired in a 10-foot-high stage. And because they'd paid for it, they insisted I preached from it. I'm already 6'3". I am 16'3" in the air, speaking to a little gathering of people smaller than Jesus' disciples. I was not happy. I didn't want to be there, and I preached badly and in a bad mood, but I still did it. Back in the day as well, before you had bank transfers, you used to deal in the ministry of envelopes. So someone would give you an envelope with a gift towards your ministry in. Now, I always had a rule, only open the envelope once you get home. Because don't let the size of the check tell you how well it went. Let the discussion with Jesus tell you. So me and the Lord talked on the way back from North Wales to home. We both decided it had been an absolute failure. Then I opened the envelope, out fell a gift. £5 book token. You can't put that in a petrol tank, can you? So, okay, it's disaster. Then last year I was preaching in Stoke. And afterwards, this 25-year-old lad comes up to me. He says, do you remember that youth event in North Wales? I'm like, I remember it, mate. You want some, do you? And he says, I gave my life to Jesus that night. And he said, 3 weeks ago, I did a youth mission of 32 young men gave their lives to Jesus. You only have to reach one Samaritan woman to get the village. God is so powerful. What could he do in your street? What could he do in your community? What could he do in your workplace? What could he do in your family? It's not about you. It's about you being willing to partner with this all-powerful God who then takes our poor efforts and makes them incredible. Secondly, Christianity can't be swept away. I want to encourage you. People have tried all the way back to Nero. When Emperor Nero dipped the disciples in pitch and burnt them as human candles in his garden, he thought he was wiping out Christianity. People have tried to wipe it. You can't wipe it out. Why? Because you can't destroy Jesus. They tried, but he's alive. And so we need to be encouraged that even if you lose the odd battle, you'll never lose the war. The beauty of being a Christian is you know how it ends. It's like I remember as a teenager when that Titanic film came out. It spent more money than anything else. And everyone said, well, that's a bit boring to watch. You know how it ends. I know how the world ends. We've got the ending, so we don't need to worry about the difficult middle. Because Christianity cannot be swept away. People try, don't they? They make it illegal. In fact, that would be the best thing the UK government could do to the church. Make it illegal. It wouldn't be great for us, but it'd be great for the kingdom because it would explode. The fastest growing church in the world is Iran. In Iran, you get killed for owning a Bible. And it's the fastest growing church in the world. A friend of mine, David Yegnazar, runs something called Elam. And they recently had to hire a Turkish swimming pool in a hotel for a day. Because 350 Iranians were coming out of Iran for the day to get baptized before going back. Things are happening. Things are kicking off. And the thing is, when the government says it's illegal, you can't do it, well, the gospel explodes. Look around the world. Look through the history of the church. What's the fastest way to grow a church? Kill one of the Christians. I can't explain it. It's just what happens. There's something about Christianity, it can't be swept away. And earlier in the book of Acts, Peter and John have been put in prison. But here it's not just them. Nearly all the disciples are put in prison at once because of what's going on. And what I love about the disciples is their perspective was different to you and me. If I got put in prison, I'd feel sorry for myself. When they got put in prison, they thought, well, there's some guards there, there's a captive audience, and kept preaching the gospel. It's amazing. Perspective changes so much, doesn't it? When David faces Goliath, he's got two choices. One, he's so big he's going to kill me. Two, he's so big I can't miss him. And I think we need to start being people with the right perspective. Then I love God's sense of humor. No stand-up comic, no one's got anything on God when it comes to humor. You look through the Bible and you look at how he uses you. As my wife often says to me, it's just evidence Jesus still rides on donkeys today when he chooses to use you, Gab. He's good. But God's got this sense of humor, this great sense of humor. And you see this moment where an angel of the Lord comes in the night, goes past the guards, goes up to the lock, opens the door, lets them all out, locks the door again. That's the funny bit. And then says to these disciples who've just been banged up for preaching, by the way, preach with all you've got, preach with all you might, do it in the morning. It's an amazing moment, isn't it? Too often with Scripture, we say what it says. We need to start saying what it looks like. Especially if you want to communicate with new generations. Start telling people what Scripture looks like, not just what it says. For example, when Lazarus is raised to life, Jesus says, Lazarus, come out. He does that for a reason. It's a communal tomb. There'd have been 15 dead people in there. If Jesus had just said, come out, all 15 would have walked out at once. A bit of a Scooby-Doo moment. Or can you imagine if Lazarus was a common name and there were three of them? Oh, not you, sunshine. You go out and say, we don't want you. We want that one. We've got to start bringing the Bible to put this passage here comes to life visually. Let them out, then we'll lock it up again just to confuse them, eh? Taking it back to Iran, where it's illegal to have a Bible, I met these two pastors who are Bible smugglers. I want to be a Bible smuggler, don't you? I just want to do it in like Birmingham or somewhere, not Iran. But these two Bible smugglers had 200 Bibles they were taking to the north of the country. Now, to smuggle Bibles in Iran, you've got to do it in the middle of the night because you're risking everything. And they're heading north. It's about 4:15 in the morning. And the steering wheel, they're in the middle of nowhere. The steering wheel on the car locks and the car pulls off to the side of the road. They pull off to the side of the road. They're in the middle of nowhere, but there's one guy stood by the passenger door. He whacks on the window, and one of the pastors takes the window down. Now, this guy says to these pastors, you have 200 Bibles in this car. And the pastors aren't wanting to lie, but they're thinking, this is our lives at stake. So, like, well, what would make you think that? He says, you've got 200 Bibles. What would make you think that? He says, we have been praying and praying and praying that God would bring us 200 Bibles. We've never had one round here. And the Lord told me if I stood here at this moment in the morning, he would bring me 200 Bibles for our village. Now, they then get back in the car, having given the Bibles away. Magically, the steering wheel's not broken anymore. Car's not had the problem since. If this thing happened in Britain, we'd be like, this would make the headline news. In Iran, it happens with such regular monotony, it's considered normal. Because as the world tries to wipe Christianity away, we've got a superpower on our side that's greater than anything anyone else could ever know. Our God is all-powerful. Christianity can't be swept away. And finally, we're compelled to share the message. We are compelled to share the message. I struggle sometimes. We all struggle to be brave enough to speak, don't we? And the one I struggle with that I get asked to do lots is kind of public things in parks and on bandstands and all of that sort of stuff. And I was doing one in Bedford. There's about 400 Christians who'd brought their friends to church on Pentecost Sunday. And there was a football match going on in a cafe, and I can't tell you how much a cappuccino over there appealed or a kickabout over there. The one thing I didn't want to do was what I had to do. And it was during the last song of worship, I felt God speak to me really clearly just to say, don't preach like a lion in a church and a mouse in a park. So I gave it some. We saw some people come to faith, and we prayed for them, and they'd stood up and stuff. Then when I'd finished doing that, I realized there was a guy stood up in the cafe. And I went over to speak to him. He said, well, I came here for a coffee and a donut, but I've just given my life to Jesus. As you asked. Okay. I pray for him. He's only eaten half his donut. His donut's there. So I pray for him, lead him to the Lord. We open our eyes, look down, and a pigeon's eating his donut. This fella looks at me, he says, that seems a fair exchange. I'll swap Jesus for the donut. But, there are moments where you have to speak up for Jesus. In fact, I pray, Lord, give us each an open goal this week. An open goal of an opportunity so obvious, so outrageous, and so unmissable that even if we don't want to step into it, we know you've made it for us. You know why? Because it's time the church rose up and started speaking out more for Jesus. On the screen is a picture of grains of sand. You put grains of sand under a microscope, they all look different. When you see them en masse, they all look the same. It's a bit like people. We're all totally different, which means we all have different access to people, different spheres of influence, different relationships with people. It takes the whole church witnessing the world to make a difference. Church is only called to worship, welfare, and witness. And we can only do witness. It's the only one we can't do in heaven. So we better crack on with it now. But it needs all of us making a difference, all of us released, not just the so-called professionals. I hate the badge people give me. They'll say, oh, you're an evangelist. No, I'm a follower of Jesus. I have a particular office, if you like, which means that I love to lead people to Jesus. But let's ditch this thing of that person's an evangelist, that person's this, that person, because it lets everyone else off the hook. And I don't get let off the hook. Only the Lord appreciates the way I sing. No one else does. Right? I am not gifted at all musically. So can I come in here this morning and say, all right, I'm not going to sing? No. Because we're all called to worship. We're all called to the welfare of God's people. And we're all called to witness. So you might be able to say to me, but I'm terrible at it. Well, I have to sing, so you have to tell people about Jesus. That's fair. But we're all called to do it. And what I love going back to the passage, the Sanhedrin have gathered, the Jewish council have gathered. And they send for the apostles. So they go along, they have a look. There's no one there. Then like, okay. So they gather back. And all these clever people are sort of saying, where are they? What's happening? What's going on? What are we going to do? Where have they possibly gone? Where have they escaped to? And someone looks out the window. And there in the temple courts are the people they've just banged up for preaching again. Because this stuff, you can't turn it on and off. We're compelled to share. We're compelled to share with other people. Each one of us needs to go and get a friend. You know, when the disciples first meet Jesus, before they even follow him, they go and get a friend. Go and get a friend or a brother. This stuff's for sharing. Who can you share with? And let's not worry too much about, let's put it this way, who fires the gun or not. You know, because people get obsessed with the moment. Actually, it takes 6 or 7 people to lead someone to Jesus. If I ever have the privilege of leading someone like that fellow in the park, it's taken a number of other people to get him there, even if he doesn't realize it. It takes lots of us to get people towards Jesus. Just be a signpost. Don't worry about having to do everything, but signpost people to Jesus. Start talking about Jesus. So many Christians go to work on a Monday and talk about Saturday. Sunday happened too. And we get asked about our lives and we talk about our kids and our relationships. No, talk about Jesus. I met with a passion expert recently. It's a great job, isn't it? I found a person who's an expert in passion. And by this, I mean what you're passionate about, not other stuff. It could sound inappropriate. And I met this passion expert because I thought, I'm not really very passionate. I need to get a bit more passionate. So I met this expert and I said to her, okay, tell me, how can you tell when people are passionate? She said, well, there's 2 really easy ways. Really easy. Firstly, what they spend their time on. Forget their money. We think people are really passionate about what they spend their money on. That's not true. People spend their money on what their culture tells them to spend money on. What people spend their time on is the biggest revealer of what they're passionate about. Secondly, what people talk about. They're the 2 signs. So if I opened your diary, how are you doing in your relationship with Jesus? Are you spending time with Jesus? And if I talk to you, what pulls out of you? You can't spend half an hour with me without hearing about Jesus. You can't spend an hour with me without hearing about Wimbledon. And you can't spend an hour and a half with me. Yeah, it goes on, doesn't it? But what do you talk about? What pours out of you? We're all called to share. And in essence, you could say, why? Why? Well, in the end, because we found hope in Jesus, haven't we? Hope in Jesus changes everything. What also changes everything is that the timer's not worked again this morning, Rod. It's great, you know. God bless this church for having a timer on a sermon and not putting it on when I'm on. But, you know, when Jesus calls us sheep, it's not a compliment. Now, I know that we're all like urban folk, so we don't know much about sheep. But sheep are really, really stupid. When we're called sheep, it's just not a compliment. Sheep are so stupid. The average sheep spends their life following around another sheep's rear. And what the sheep in front does, you do. So if that sheep walks off a cliff, so do you. We have lamb chops. Sheep are stupid. Sheep are hard to get to do anything at the same time as well. You watch sheep herding on the TV if you're ever that bored, and you see it just doesn't work quite. Imagine not having a shepherd. How hard is your life with a shepherd? Imagine not having one. Honestly, compassion is the starting point of evangelism. Compassion for people who don't know Jesus. Sheep without a shepherd. Take Psalm 23 in your personal life and turn all the positives into negatives. That's the testimony of a sheep without a shepherd. Don't get too familiar with what it's like. We're used to Jesus. Don't get used to it. Ask the Lord each day, show me what it would be like not to have you. And out of that pours compassion for others. Because everything in this life fails you. You know, we're living in this time where people seem invincible. Where some celebrities get a bit of plastic surgery and then look younger than someone 30 years younger. Do you know what? In the end, death and decay hits everyone. The one thing that makes a difference in life is Jesus. In the end, the friends run out, the drugs don't work, the relationships aren't as happy, the football team loses, things fall apart, Brexit happens, stuff happens here, people don't know what to do, people don't know what to depend on, life falls apart, but Jesus remains. And we as Christians need to get better at this, better at being centered on Jesus, because everything else will fail you, but Jesus remains. Everything else is secondary to Jesus. I realized this most when my grandma had Alzheimer's disease. And she had it as bad as you can have it. For the last 8 years of her life, she sat in a corner of a nursing home dribbling on a teddy bear. She had one child. My dad was one of 4 grandchildren. She didn't recognize any of us. She couldn't speak. She couldn't do anything. She was like a baby again, but she'd never learn. Tell you something, the friends run out quite quickly when you're that ill. The money goes very quickly, and you're left with very little. Where is Jesus when you've got Alzheimer's like that? She'd been a Christian for over 60 years. Where is Jesus? And my mum went in to see my grandma one day on her birthday. My mum went in for my mum's benefit, not my grandma's, because my grandma didn't know who my mum was, what a birthday was, let alone presents. And my mum sits in my grandma's bedroom and turns to her and says, "Can I pray with you?" Now, my grandma can't talk, so being a good evangelical Christian my mum is, she takes the silence as the yes she wants to hear. And my mum begins to pray for this dear old lady, that she might know peace in the midst of mental torture. And then my mum gets to the end of praying and she opens her eyes and my grandma's eyes are shut. She thinks, this is wonderful. But then something outrageous happened. For the only time in her last 8 years of life, my grandma spoke as she prayed. She said, I don't know who I am, and I don't know what I am, and I don't know where I am. But Lord Jesus, please love me. You can lose everything, and I've lost nothing. Because hope has a name, and his name is Jesus. This God is all-powerful. This faith can't be swept away, but we are compelled to share it, that others might know life in all its fullness now, and life in all its fullness forever. Because you know what? He came to this earth, and he gave food to the hungry, health to the sick, and life to the dead. But then Jesus died on a cross, taking every wrong thing upon himself you've ever done, ever would do, ever could do, that you could be liberated from that and have a direct relationship with God. Then they threw him in a grave, and 3 days later they went to visit the grave, and the grave is empty. Why? Because Jesus defeated death. For 2,000 years, people have been looking for the body. They ain't found one. Every cynic in the world has gone looking for that body. Do you know why they haven't found one? Because there isn't a body, because Jesus is alive. And he came that we might have life, but then we might share it with others.